Good evening, everyone. This is Lynn, and we are continuing Season 2 of the Literary Machine podcast. Today, we're going to analyze what exactly went wrong with the Assassin's Creed movie. Before we get started, if you're returning, welcome back to the podcast. If you're new here, allow me to explain. I'm a writer, though not yet a professionally published one, and I love stories. I love immersing myself into a new world, getting engrossed by the narrative, and following the characters. It's why I write myself. There is a lot of power in story, and the goal with my podcast is to analyze the elements that give story their power, from plot structure to characterization and world building. This isn't meant to be a strictly critical podcast, though I will admit it's much easier to talk about the things that missed over the things that didn't. Remember that storytelling is subject to the reader's perspective. The things I criticize may not necessarily be bad. That said, I will do my best to offer concrete reasons for my positions. Please feel free to comment below whether you think my criticisms are fair or not, or please bring up something I may have overlooked. If you enjoy these podcasts, I please ask that you like and subscribe. It would greatly help me to grow this channel. The feast is prepared, but before we dig in, I like to offer a brief synopsis for anyone who may not be familiar with either the movie or the games. I'll be focusing on the movie, but just be aware that the main gist of the plot is cut and paste across nearly all of the Assassin's Creed franchise. I quit playing after Assassin's Creed 3. I know Black Flag moved away from the original overarching narrative, but I have no idea how Origins, Odyssey, or any of the other newer Assassin's Creeds play out. The movie opens with a text scroll explaining the plot. A secret organization dating back thousands of years called the Templars are searching for the Apple of Eden. This artifact is thought to offer the ability to control all of mankind and deprive them of free will. The Assassin's Creed Brotherhood stand in the way of the Templars, scouring the annals of history for the apple and safeguarding it across the centuries. I'm obviously paraphrasing, but it's not bad as far as recounts go. Nice and simple. It then cuts to a gathering of hooded figures in Spain, 1492. This is the Brotherhood, and they're preparing to induct a new member. They've also gotten wind of the Templars' plan to take the King of Spain's son hostage to force him to give up the apple. The Brotherhood's plan is to intercept the son and safeguard him. Then it cuts to present day where a boy proceeds to do a stupid stunt. He fails. He then hobbles home only to find his mom has been stabbed and his father is standing there with assassin gauntlets dripping blood. He then tells his son to run. The boy does. In the background, there's a roar of car engines as a bunch of cars descend on the location. Knowing the games, the Templars undoubtedly located them and the man killed his wife to prevent her from being taken. Apparently, though, they never told their son about the order, so to him, this is just a random murder. Holy crap, Jeremy Irons is in this? Neat. We jump an indeterminate amount of time and see an adult sitting in a jail cell. A priest shows up indicating the man's execution is impending. He's then strapped into the chair. He sees a woman with black hair watching him intently. It glosses over the actual execution and just shows a random spattering of images. What the man saw upon death? Unclear. He wakes again. The woman he spotted earlier tells him that he died, but they brought him back to life. He tries to escape. He doesn't. The woman, Sophia, is a scientist who, as she tells it, wants to rid mankind of its violent tendencies. Yes, she's actually a Templar. The main crux behind the Assassin's Creed games finally comes into view. Sophia wants the man, Cal, to go into the Animus. The Animus is designed to allow him to relive a previous ancestor's memories. In this universe, memories are genetic and essentially written into people's DNA. During the course of reliving these memories, Cal quite literally goes through the motions his ancestors go through and ends up a trained assassin. Cal isn't the only one the Templars have of the Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. There are other patients who have been forced to relive their ancestral memories in search of the Apple of Eden. They spend most of their scenes desperately trying to persuade Cal not to cooperate. Cal is pretty stubborn and pretty much does his own thing. In the end, Sophia discovers that Cal's ancestor gave the Apple of Eden to Christopher Columbus, and the Templars quickly surmise that he apparently never gave it away and was buried with it in a cathedral in Spain. The Templars are in such a rush to get to this cathedral that they don't do their due diligence, and Cal and his fellow inmates massacre those at the facility and bust out. The Templars get the Apple of Eden. Jeremy Irons takes it for his own to present to the Order of the Templars as his achievement. Sophia is, for some reason, bothered by all this, but not enough to actually do anything. Cal shows up, he just walks onto the stage and knifes Jeremy Irons in the back and reclaims the Apple of Eden and just slips out into the crowd. Sophia kneels in front of her father, Jeremy Irons, and essentially vows revenge against Cal, leaving room for a potential sequel. Cal and his Brotherhood chums just disappear. When I first heard about this movie, all the fans who spoke about it were absolutely furious with its existence. I prepared myself for Mortal Kombat Annihilation levels of bad. Just something absolutely awful. And I'll be honest, I don't know why the fuss. I don't get the anger. It wasn't a bad movie by any stretch. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't good either. Mostly I'd say it was fairly middling, inoffensive, and frankly, rather true to the premise of the entire franchise. Have people forgotten how silly the entire premise of the Assassin's Creed games are? We're going to stick you into a machine and make you relive your ancestors' memories because it turns out those are coded into your DNA. That's about as fantastical as science fiction gets. Now, as gamers, we let that bit of plot slide because the real fun was in running around to historical places with incredible athleticism and being able to sneak around like a ninja. That's awesome. That was enough of a selling point that I stuck with it through 5 games. The non-gamer audience was going to have a difficult time buying into that, and let's be real, this movie was made to appeal to much more than just the fans. So what exactly was so infuriating about it? When I saw people talking about this, they were pretty non-specific in their criticisms, but one of those criticisms was that it focused on an entirely original character with an original ancestor. I personally think they made the right choice in moving away from the likes of Desmond and his ancestors. Maybe I'm alone in this, but Desmond is a breathtakingly boring character. He's as dry as sawdust, especially in the original Assassin's Creed. The vast majority of your playtime is spent in the Animus playing Altair, but occasionally they pull Desmond out of the machine so he can take a rest. But Desmond was just locked in this room with nowhere to go and nothing to do. Playing his scenes was a total drag, and there weren't many. There was only about an hour of game time with him. Desmond was of the everyman trope. He was just a bartender who got snatched off the streets by the Templars. You later learn that he was part of a family that was hidden away from the world like it was part of a cult. So he ran away to have a normal life. Naturally, his family was part of the Brotherhood, and they were in an ongoing battle with the Templars. The only similarity that Desmond and Cal seem to have is that they had very little knowledge of their Assassin's Creed background. Their character arc is learning about their role in the Brotherhood and, subsequently, the fight against the Templars. Otherwise, I'd say Cal is a little more interesting just for his criminal background, and he's very likely a murderer if we first meet him as an adult on death row. Frankly, I don't think they do enough with Cal. I said he was more interesting by virtue of the fact that we meet him on death row, and that's about as interesting as it gets. Truth be told, I think he suffers from a lack of drive. Heroes need a motivation for something so that when they meet their obstacles, they make decisions for getting around those obstacles based on their drive. It's what makes a character unique. Cal's seeming motivation is revenge against his dad. When Cal was a child, he saw the aftermath of his mom's murder by his dad. When we next see him in the electrochair, his last words are, "Tell my father I'll see him in hell." Then he wakes up in Sophie's hands, At first, there's promise because he struggles to get away from her even when she's telling him to stop. She talks him down from throwing himself off the edge of the building and promises him his freedom if he helps her. This is initially what prompts him to subject himself to the Animus. Throughout the rest of the movie, Sophie tells him that her ambition is to end all violence by humans. At first, he seems to find this amusing, but later he's taken to his dad, who has been a prisoner of this facility for decades. Jeremy Irons gives Cal a wrist blade so that he can end his father. His father tells him that he accepts his fate, but that Cal better not be cooperating with these guys. He says to him that his mother had welcomed her death and knew what it meant, that she wanted to die to protect the Apple of Eden. Cal then doesn't kill his father. It seems to some extent that he's buying what Sophie is putting down. He actively insists on going back into the Animus to find the Apple of Eden. Once it's found, there's suddenly a scene where all of his assassin ancestors, including his mother, surround him, and she sights the creed back at him. Sophie and Jeremy Irons leave to retrieve the apple, but at this point there's a full riot going on at this facility because the other patients were also Assassin's Creed Brotherhood members. And it's at this point that Cal picks up his assassin's heritage and joins the cause. What I'm trying to say here is that Cal is very easily swayed, and usually by the last person he speaks with. In a hero's journey type story, in this case Cal discovering his assassin's ancestors' roots and taking up the mantle, you want a hero who is headstrong. Maybe he doesn't always fully know what he wants, but he knows how to get there. It's never clear what Cal actually wants, especially since he turns down revenge against his father. It's not that a character can't change their mind, but we're not given clear indications of what even is on his mind. While Desmond is frankly dry and boring, he does get development across the 5 games he was a protagonist in. While he never particularly endeared himself to me, that doesn't mean that people didn't find him endearing. Cal is a non-entity, and that fails to draw in audiences. Sophie was probably the best character in the whole movie, and that's not saying much. While she couches all of her intentions as a humanitarian scientist interested in the welfare of humanity, she's a Templar. The goal of the Templars is to strip everyone of free will via the Apple of Eden. The movie story doesn't go into this, but it's pretty clear that in order for this Eden to occur, there's going to be an in-group and an out-group. Sophie, given that her dad is a leader in the Templar organization, obviously expects to be part of the in-group who won't be subject to the Apple's machinations. At any rate, her primary tool is in nonviolent persuasion. She's earnest in her goals to prevent violence, however repugnant the means, so we can understand her motivations. Unfortunately, she's frequently undercut by her father, Jeremy Irons. Most of the times Cal ends up in the Animus, he's forced into it by Jeremy Irons' goons, which causes friction between him and his daughter Sophie. Unfortunately, her character loses potency in the end and falls back into the dregs of the other non-entity characters. If it isn't clear already, I do like Jeremy Irons as an actor. He's played some truly iconic villains, most notably Scar from The Lion King and Simon Gruber from Die Hard with a Vengeance. His career is unfortunately punctuated by a lot of lackluster roles, but when he gets good material, he knows how to use it. Obviously, he's well practiced being a villain, so his role as a Templar leader is a good fit for him. But just like Cal and Sophie, his character just doesn't have enough substance to be all that interesting. He at least has clear drive as the leader of the Templar, and he employs some violent means to make Cal cooperate. First, he forces Cal, then he tries to persuade Cal by giving him the opportunity to get revenge on his father. Jeremy Irons' character very much believes that the ends justify the means, which puts him at odds with his daughter. Now let's talk about Musa. Oh right, I never even mentioned him. Well, Musa seems to be the leader of the other assassin patients. He's the first to approach Cal about not going into the Animus. Others soon follow his lead. Unfortunately, because our hero, Cal, doesn't treat him as important, he then lacks importance to the audience. He's an extremely minor character that basically just gets a name, although he accompanies Cal to the end of the movie. We're left with this vague idea that if there was a sequel, Musa would be a much more influential character. But right now, he's nothing of real note and is simply there to fulfill the rule of cool because he gets to be badass near the end. There is one thing that the movie gets right that the video game was notably lacking in the world building department. In the video game, Desmond just lays down on a bed to relive his ancestors' memories. At some point in Assassin's Creed 2, one of his companions says to him, "Let's put your new skills to the test." The idea is that in the course of reliving his ancestors' memories, he's learning the same fighting and acrobatic skills that they have. But how did Desmond develop the muscle tone and stamina to operate in the same way? In the movie, the Animus is a fancy robotic arm that helps facilitate Cal's experience, so he can jump around enacting all the motions, and the arm carries him throughout the experience. Going through the motions is a good way of practicing, even if it isn't totally perfect. So I can buy it more in the movie that Cal became an assassin in a week compared to the video game. Let's talk about the ending. To start, it was badly executed. The rest of the movie was forgivable, but the ending isn't because it's just absurd on its face. When you have an absurd concept like genetic memories, then you need to land the ending. Admittedly, I can't decide if it was quintessential Assassin's Creed, but realism dictates that the ending was stupid, further exemplified by characters not really following through on their characterization. Jeremy Irons and Sophie find out that Aguilar, Cal's ancestor, gave the Apple of Eden to Christopher Columbus. The conversation between the two suggests that Christopher Columbus hid the Apple of Eden to his death and was buried with it. Let's try to ignore the fact that people would have almost certainly gone through Columbus's belongings and it would have been found then. Jeremy Irons and Sophie leave immediately, and the patients rebel against security and come to Cal's rescue. They somehow understand that he had a revelation and is now firmly on their side, aligned against the Templars. They make their escape. Jeremy Irons and Sophie get the Apple of Eden. As a leader of the Templars, Jeremy Irons is to present it in a big ceremony where all the Templars are gathered. For some reason, they're all wearing hoods, which makes it easy for Cal and his allies to slip in. Although they appear to just walk straight through the front door, Cal meets Sophie outside the theater. She's upset with her father because he's basically taking all the credit for finding the apple, and he used tactics to achieve it that she didn't approve of. Cal tells her that she can stop this. She just stands there and does nothing. So different from the ambitious character we saw not 20 minutes ago. Cal just enters the grand hall where Jeremy Irons is, sneaks up behind him and knifes him in the back and takes the apple. Everyone, we're talking hundreds of Templars, just watches him do this and does absolutely nothing to move against him. Cal and his allies immediately slip out the door with all the other Templars because their hooded outfits allow them to blend in. On the one hand, it's very reminiscent of the game. On the other, there is exactly 0 scenarios where I was able to knife someone and immediately fall into a hooded crowd to blend in. Nah, in the AC games, you had to make a fast getaway, or at least you did in all the games except the first. In the first game, you'd stab someone in the throat and then have a very long conversation about how Altair was being played. Sophie then approaches her father's body and basically vows revenge, setting up the possibility of a sequel, as I said earlier. I'm sorry, but that ending is just dumb on its face. Clearly, they lack the budget or the runtime to have a cool action getaway scene. Can I also talk about the bad decision to make Christopher Columbus the hero of the Assassin's Creed Order? This movie came out in 2016. Christopher Columbus's reputation was in the toilet before that. Well, with the whole handing out smallpox blankets to the indigenous people in America to kill them. All the other heroes of the Order were the likes of Leonardo da Vinci, who still has a good reputation over the centuries. I know Ubisoft is absolutely tickled by the idea of looping in famous historical figures as heroes, but Christopher Columbus was undoubtedly a bad choice. And now, for the pièce de résistance. Let's talk about the story structure and why it didn't work. Despite what I said about the movie being true to the games and what they presented, the story structure is the opposite of the games. In the games, the present day scenes were essentially the connective tissue between the large story segments dedicated to the ancestors. We get much more time in historical places with Altair, Ezio, and Connor than we get of Desmond in the modern day. The game designers knew that the game audience wouldn't have much patience for Desmond since he was just stuck somewhere taking a break between Animus sessions. By contrast, in the movie, the focus is on Cal and the scientist Sophia. She tries to use her words to persuade and drive Cal into doing the Animus sessions. While there is some dialogue in the historical scenes of the movie, most of that is just set pieces to drive the action scenes. We know basically nothing about Cal's ancestor, Aguilar, other than he seemed to have an affinity for the woman assassin that he was partnered with. Heck, I had to look up Aguilar's name because I'm unsure if it was ever said, and remember, I watch movies with subtitles. In my personal opinion, I don't think the screenwriters made the right choice in their structure of the film. They had too many characters for the story they were trying to tell and not enough screen time. Not that it's impossible to work with so many characters in such a short span. Guy Ritchie's movie, Snatch, had about 8 different characters it switched between, and it ran for less than 2 hours. But each character was distinct and memorable because the dialogue was so smart and snappy. Guy Ritchie truly demonstrates the power of dialogue in Snatch. Unfortunately, the Assassin's Creed writers don't exactly have strong material to work from, especially since they were forced into creating original characters. Maybe the movie would have been better if it focused on the likes of Ezio, but again, their core audience was not their fans, but the average Joe. They do their best, but Cal simply isn't interesting enough or charismatic enough to carry the narrative. Just like Desmond. However, the game structure wouldn't have worked either. Yes, the historical portions would have been better developed and interesting, but the flow would be hampered by periodically pulling the audience out of the past and into the present day. Even in the first game, the Doctor pushing Desmond into the Animus was mostly vaguely evil. Desmond was boring, and then there was Lucy, who was an assistant, who was low-key a spy, and also low-key a double agent, not getting into that right now, trying to be unobtrusive. So there isn't a lot of material for anyone to attach themselves to here. What they should have done is just set the entire story in the past and just focused on the Assassin's Creed Brotherhood versus the Templars without switching back to the modern day and interrupting the flow. What they could have done as sequel bait is have the ancestor, Aguilar, have a moment where he realizes his faraway progeny is following his life. If I remember correctly, in Assassin's Creed Revelations, Ezio had a moment at the end where he discovered Desmond and knew he was watching from the future. They could have done a moment like that. Then in the sequel, if there is one, have it take place in the present day where Cal and his fellow assassins have to carry on the fight and the race for the Apple of Eden. I think that would have been much more palatable for the average audience than this silly dance back and forth when the film time and, let's be real, the characterization aren't enough to carry the story. Overall, Assassin's Creed was a middling film hampered by the fact that it was a video game first. It's not that I think video games can't be adapted to film. Some of the more narrative-heavy video games, such as The Last of Us, rely much more heavily on script and cutscenes to tell their story, and therefore an adaptation to film or TV are bound to be much more successful. Assassin's Creed was never popular because of the narrative. Low-key, the overarching story sucks. Behind all the subterfuge, assassinations, and this tug-of-war with the Templars, these people acting as the Roman god avatars are trying to prevent humanity from being wiped out by a solar flare. When I got to that part in Assassin's Creed 3, I pretty much gave up on the story. How is that connected to anything else that's been going on in the narrative? I've gotten distracted. There's some video games that will never be anything more than video games. And that's okay. I've heard rumors that someone is trying to adapt Shadow of the Colossus into a movie. That's going to be an awful movie. Shadow of the Colossus game and entire story hinges on the interactivity of a video game. Will people really enjoy watching a lone man on his horse riding through the barren lands, hearing only the wind blow, maybe a babbling creek, or the chirping of crickets? No! Sure, the fights are cool, but as was just demonstrated by the likes of the Assassin's Creed movie, action is not a promising way to make a successful movie. But this is why I'm streaming a lot of the games. Yes, most of them are story heavy, but I've also played games where the story is more subtle and up to interpretation, like the Little Nightmares trilogy and the Talos Principle. I digress. That is all for my analysis of Assassin's Creed the movie. Frankly, I thought it was decently faithful in terms of concept, but even halfway pulling it off doesn't guarantee success, as I just outlined. The film lacked proper focus, staging, and an even halfway decent script. Thank you all for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Comment down below your thoughts about either the Assassin's Creed video games or the movie. If you're one of the fans who absolutely hated it, please tell me in the comments why. I don't think you're wrong to hate it, I'm just curious what drives the animosity. Please also like and subscribe. Every view, every thumbs up, and every comment are helpful. I will see you in the next episode. This is Lynn, signing out.